we tend to lose hope when we start focusing on, oh, they're never going to change. They're always going to be this way. This is never going to be any different, versus being in our own yard and looking at, how can I show up differently here? This thing I'm dealing with needs to change. What is that?
Welcome to What to Say and How to Say It. Today we are narrowing down our love series, and we are arriving at love always hopes today and how that shows up in our communication. Now, I know that we are in a time where there's a lot of hopelessness happening in the culture. We've just gone through a pandemic. A lot of people have battled with depression because of that. We are seeing increases in broken relationships, specifically marriage. We are seeing suicide rates go up and a lot of just, sad things happening around us. And so people are really starving for, hope. So we're going to hopefully encourage some of our listeners today with, what God has to say about that. And as usual, we have Nina Rosner with us, who is a communication expert and knows what hope and probably hopelessness sounds like in our communication. So Nina, welcome.
Yeah. I think I've written a few words around hopelessness that have never been published and should never be. Because if you get in that space, man, it's the worst. And I have just a ton of empathy. If you felt hopeless and you feel stuck, that's a place that you want to come out of. And sometimes you need hope to feel like you could even have it in the first place. And one of the things around, the podcast, we're aiming at Christian married men and women that have been to the workshops. They've paid the therapist, they've read the books, and they're still stuck and desperate to save their marriages. And the reality is that stuck and desperate feeling is often a feeling of hopelessness, because you do all this stuff and you're hopeless. And the best thing about Jesus is that he is the hope of the world. He is our hope. Yeah, I know, right? I know, right? Well, and what's funny is, as I was sitting here listening to you talk about all that stuff, I went, oh yeah, that happened too, and oh yeah. And I felt myself physically, my shoulders started to sink, and I'm like, wait a minute, no, this is just information. And so I gave myself a little check, because it's really easy to look at the news and then 4 minutes later be so discouraged about everything and crying about our country and whatever. I filled up my truck with gas. I talked to a complete stranger. He's like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, well, you know how it's going. And he said, yeah, I feel like I'm at the bank, taking out a loan. I'm like, dude, I'm right here with you, man. So we were hopeful in our hopelessness in the middle of that moment, but we made a laugh out of it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big points, is that, God tells us, Jesus says, have no thought for the morrow. Stop worrying about tomorrow. Like, there's so much worry that tomorrow will have for itself, like what's going on right now. I'm spending all this stupid money. But it could have been a bad moment. It could have been angry. Yes. But instead I had a moment of joy with this complete stranger. and the context wasn't awesome. I don't like it, but we still were able to connect. And humanity is still out there, alive and well, and we are resilient. So I think that's a hope thing. And that is love.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that illustration. And you're right. Sometimes you just got to learn how to make lemonade out of your lemons. Sometimes bringing humor into the situation just to lighten the mood up. It could be worse, right? Mm-hmm. I know that for me, one of the things I have to constantly do is remind myself that I'm only here for a temporary time, that we're just really passing through, and that eternity is forever. And so if there is hopelessness, if there is all those things happening, it's not going to be forever. So
Yeah.
I might as well laugh about it. Might as well crack a joke. If you can.
Yeah, I think I get in trouble when I leave the now.
Yeah, that's it.
That's the big thing right now. I move out of what just happened. I'm living with my college student right now. She's home from college, which is an absolute joy, which also makes me crazy now and again, because we're not used to being in each other's space, right? And then her boyfriend's over here a lot, which is awesome because we're trying to get to know him. He lives in Chicago. But now I have these other people in my house, and then my son, who he lives with, is here. So I've got these 20 somethings underfoot, and they're really different. And I have a lot of opportunities during the day to check my mind, because some of the things that they say are things that I go, oh no, about, and I'm not going to get specific, but they're small things usually. Mm-hmm. But there's so many opportunities every single day to worry about something, or to kick that ball down the field of a stressful situation. And then, and then that starts bunching up your heart as a mom or whatever. But none of it's necessary. And so I have to check my mind and go, okay, so they're in my house and they are actually really fun people. They're not criminals. Okay. They are not murdering people. They are not holding up grocery stores. They're all working. Hello, going to college. I mean, these are great people. They're Christian. They're following the Lord. Yeah, they have some ideas I don't agree with. So settle yourself down here, sis. What is your standard? Really? You're going to get discouraged? No. And I refuse to allow Satan to twist up my stuff and get me in a pit over and it happens really fast. And then you believe in lies that nobody even said, like really fast. Stupid. And I think I'm having trouble because there's so many of them. Like there's 3 of them and they're mostly here all at the same time. I can handle one. I get outnumbered and it's just like all over for a minute. So I've noticed that about myself. It's great. But anyway, what were we talking about?
You were saying how, we lose the now. And I think that's huge, because that's what worry and hopelessness comes from, is thinking about the future and what could and what might not and what could go wrong. And it just robs you of the joy of the now and being present and enjoying the fact that you have all 3 of them in, one place. And like you said, that they're safe and they're loved. And it reminds me of my my middle, who when it rains, she often kind of gets really frightened, and it's because she still remembers from 3 years ago when Harvey was here in Houston, and we had all that rain.
Oh yeah.
And it flooded the streets and nobody could move, and she was only like 4, but this apparently was ingrained in her memory. Yeah. And every single time it rains now, she goes through a thing and she goes, Mommy, is it going to flood? Is it going to flood? And so I have to really comfort her in that and remind her that she's safe.
Yep.
And that, nothing bad is going to happen. And, even if it does, Jesus is with us. It's something that if we're not focusing on the right stuff, we can get carried away, whether we're 4, 5, or 55. It's it steals our joy.
It really does. And I think the hard thing for people is, okay, I didn't even know how I got in this place of hopelessness.
Yeah.
But we're sitting here and we're just discouraged, and that's worth taking a look at. So how did you get here in the first place? Were you looking at the news? And I wish I was different. I wish I could be less fearful around the news, but I'm not. And so I give myself about 15 minutes a week and that's next to nothing, right? To go look at headlines and whatever. There's a few things that I'm called to interact with, but usually somebody will send me an email. And my husband's a news junkie, so he loves this stuff, and he'll let me know if something big is happening, right? And I need to call a congressman or a representative or whatever about. But for the most part, I find it useless. to really dig into that stuff. But I do look, because if I don't look, then I'm going to have, for me, the not knowing something is worse than knowing a little bit, but there's a balance there.
Right.
So knowing too much, right? So that applies, that particular way of thinking applies to a lot of different things. I've had 2 sons that have had major thoracic surgery, and a husband had open heart surgery. And so these are very big surgeries.
Yeah.
And I had to walk the line of, I need information, but I don't need too much information. Yeah. Like, I could watch what they were going to do to my sons. It's a pectus excavatum repair where they slide metal bars inside of their bodies and pop their sternums out of their hearts. It's a horribly painful surgery. But it
sounds like it.
Yeah, it was nasty, but they're both alive and healthy, and their lungs and heart grew the way they were supposed to as a result of it. So that's awesome. I could not look at what they were going to do to my husband. And it was actually not a scary open heart. It was actually fairly routine, if there is such a word for something, that people, and we had the blessing of Cleveland Clinic, which does gazillions of this. And the guy that wrote the textbook on how to do them is there. So I was like, okay, that's enough for me to know. I'm not going to go look at YouTube on this, but I did with my sons, because that, for whatever reason, but I had to know myself. Yeah. So being in the now, what does that mean? Well, I've got decisions I need to make around this thing. Is what I'm doing useful to making decisions? So we didn't need, like with what they were doing to the kids, I needed to understand that, compare it to a different procedure, and then listen to the Lord around that. With this thing, it was, here's the expert in the world, right? He's right here.
Yeah.
So getting information can be useful. It can also be really damaging, and it can cause hopelessness, right? Mm-hmm. The other piece of it is, what do you allow your mind to do? Like, are you fantasizing a worst possible situation?
Yeah.
Because a lot of, that's what worrying is.
Yeah.
And that will take you to the pit of hell itself really fast.
Oh yeah. That's like where Satan has the most fun, is in our thought life. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I've certainly been guilty of, and I think what I've learned is it's a coping mechanism, right? Because you think the worst, so that if the worst happens, then you've already thought about it. It's mm-hmm. like, I don't know what it's called, but it's like not having to be surprised or something.
Mm-hmm. No, like that. And that's actually useful, yeah. Right? Like you got to do a little bit of that. That's actually smart.
Yeah.
It's moving past that and ruminating on it, and then adding details around it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Sometimes too many details, but yeah, it is. I find a way to cope, but you're right. It has to be in a place where it serves you well, mm-hmm. Versus place you in the pit. Because the other side of that is, you can spend all that time and energy imagining the worst case, and then it never happens, and then all that energy was just for nothing, really.
Yep. Yeah, it really was. And so much of this too has to do with, whose yard is this in? Okay. So we tend to lose hope when we start focusing on, oh, they're never going to change. They're always going to be this way. This is never going to be any different, versus being in our own yard and looking at, how can I show up differently here? This thing I'm dealing with needs to change. What is that? So I'm just going to this is the PG version of our thing. We didn't talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it. Okay. So one of the downsides of pornography addiction is, about 7 years in, if you have a husband that's addicted to porn, he's likely to get erectile dysfunction. And then he's likely to need really aberrant and even more out there types of things to view, because what was working before ain't working anymore. And what's going on it's all in his head, right?
In his head. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so you've got this thing that's been created. Well, so a couple of things happen. Women aren't affected by this early on. Like, it's easy to go, well, that's his yard. Well, the problem is that as it goes on for a period of time, At some point it starts to affect her because she's no longer, she can make the most beautiful,
Yeah.
in shape, culturally appropriate, like different cultures have different views of what's attractive or whatever, but she could have been the most attractive thing to him in the universe, 6 months ago, but now he's in this, or a year or whatever. She could still be exactly like that and still be, whatever, but he now is into something else.
Right.
And so then he's not interested in her. Well, now this affects her. And so that's the place where somebody needs to go, okay, this is a relationship issue.
Yeah.
But instead, women, I hate this for them, but we're conflict avoidant in general. We're more agreeable than men. And that's the big 5 personality index. It's not me being sexist. That comes from protecting infants. Okay, somebody take issue with me. Go ahead. I don't care. But the point is that we are going to be a little more reticent about bringing up a conflict thing, especially about something so private, right? And it has some shame wrapped around it. And then we don't want to step into that mom space either. So it's a really tough thing. And so most women just totally overlook it. And then it's allowed to be there. And then it gets worse. And then she's getting resentful and hurt over the thing and hopeless. And then he's over here in this horrible place because he was allowed to continue in that. And maybe he would have anyway. And I don't like the word of allowed, but the point is that what he was bringing to the relationship was left alone. It was not addressed. So it was condoned. And so in that, she's got hopelessness. And there's like 28 different places along the line that she could have shown up differently. Right? Yeah. And so that's the thing that we need to recognize, that hopelessness is a tool of the enemy that he will use to keep us stuck and victims and pointing our fingers at our spouse or our kids or whoever, blaming them. And yeah, it's absolutely, the guy is sinning, sure, right? And by the way, just so that more and more women are getting into this, so not to beat on men for the whole time here. Women we're not perfect. I'm just using this as a graphic example, unfortunately. But the point is that there's all these places along the line where we could have done something different, but because we chose early on to say, well, it's his yard, that was an excuse. If it was affecting her, it's in her yard too. It's in the marriage's yard. It's that alleyway in between where you're supposed to grow flowers and nurture something beautiful. So hopelessness will keep you stuck in victim status. But if you can go, you know what, I can't really impact what he's doing because I'm not a puppeteer and he's not a puppet, but I can look at what I'm doing. I can look at what am I bringing to the relationship. I can look at what am I doing here to deal with that. And then, what kind of hard conversations, what kind of things can I do to create a situation where this is going to be looked at and dealt with? And, contrary to a lot of couples coaches out there and therapists, I'm not a huge fan of the wife being the husband's accountability partner, especially in some case. I have, and maybe I've been living under a rock, but I haven't seen that work out well. I've seen it turn into her mothering him. And so what really works best is for men to go find a group of men. They're struggling with the same thing. There's groups all over the United States. They're all over the place online because men don't like being trapped in this. And they're trapped. It's like a drug addiction. And that's the thing that women don't understand, is that it is very much like a drug addiction. But so if it's an addiction, well, let's look at it like that. What do you do to not enable that? Right. Yeah. So there's all these things, even with something that is as damaging as that, we're never hopeless. Even if, there really isn't any cause to be hopeless. We have lots of circumstances that we don't like in our lives on a daily basis. But, do you have 2 legs? Did they work this morning? Were you able to get out of bed? Can you breathe? Do you have a car? It's tougher to fill it up with gas, man. I get that. I really do. But do you have children that are healthy? And if not, do you have time with them today? And then we all have gone through things, life threatening things. We've gone through loss. We've gone through grief. We've gone through death. And through all of that, we can still put our hope in Jesus. He doesn't promise that this life is going to be perfect and easy. Matter of fact, he says it's going to be harder. Take up your cross and follow me. But understanding that he's with us, it makes a lot of the difference. And then choosing to, and this is the thing that I really want to hit home with hope. So when I have not betrayed myself over and over and over again, right? When I've spoken up, when I've lovingly said, hey, this needs to stop. And when I've not betrayed myself, I've created more opportunity for hope in my life. When I choose to let other people walk all over me, when I choose to be a doormat, then it's easier for me to lose hope because I've basically put my happiness in the hands of everyone around me.
Oof. Wow. Yeah. That's a thing. You're touching a nerve now. I do think that is a big part of why people do struggle with hope is we put our hope in the wrong place. Our hope, you're right, should be in Jesus. It's not in another person. It's not in our jobs. It's not in perfect children. But how easy is that for us to just shift subtly to those things? And so what I hear is it's really about activating the hope that God gives us. And that might mean deciding to be grateful, just deciding that you have so many other places to look,
yes,
and to get your eyes off of the thing that feels hopeless and maybe shift it to something else. And then also thinking about what you can do, in your situation that might bring hope. Being the victim is a place we love,
Hey, I've set up camp, roasted marshmallows, dug a deeper pit, invited friends over to my own pity party there, man. I mean, I get this, but you're right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Gratitude is the secret sauce. It's the jet fuel to getting out of there and having that habit of thinking, of being grateful. I mean, God tells us over and over again in the Bible, be thankful, be grateful, show up in your suffering with gratitude. And it changes everything. It really does.
Yeah, it almost, you lift yourself out of the pit, it's amazing how, I had a friend and she was telling me about how she struggled with her thought life and how she often fell into that place where it's a pit, and it's often hard when somebody's in that mindset or they're, grieving or, whatever the situation is that's bringing them into that place to know what to say. And, I would just, ask her a question in that moment. Often the question would be, well, what did you do for yourself today? Something simple like that. What did you eat today that you really enjoyed? And just that simple shifting from her situation to that little thing, lifted her mood or changed her body language, kind of like you said, the posture changes when we shift, our perspective. And so, it's a practice to have the hope that God calls us to have, and we can activate it. So
I love that word, activate. I mean, it's a very intentional, it's like flipping a switch, but you have to look for it. You have to make it happen. It's action based.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very powerful. And we're responsible for the culture that we create in our head. That's us, which, that's a terrible thought sometimes, right? That, I'm responsible for what's going on in my head. Well, who else is? Like, for real, we got to grow the heck up in that space. Me too.
Yeah. And I also want to qualify that, it's okay to acknowledge our feelings, because, we're big here at Greater Impact about validating and affirming, what you feel is what you feel. Hey, David was a feeler, he cried out to the Lord all the time. So is Jeremiah. There is a lot of weeping. Jesus wept as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so feelings are normal and created by God. But there's also joy as well in the sorrow. So hopefully, if yes, we can get the tools and the skills and how to move from sorrow and hopelessness to joy. We can grow up, like you said, and help others.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up, because if you don't interact with those bad feelings, you're not growing up. You have to interact with yourself and be like, okay, self, what is that? And I involve Jesus in that, because I don't know what I'm feeling half the time. Lord, what is this? It doesn't feel good. What is this? And we name it and we normalize it. And the data shows that lowers that intensity, and then I can hear him and I can receive comfort.
Yes.
And then take responsibility and do something different, activate, show up with integrity, move forward. It matters. So I'm not saying, oh, just put on a happy face, pretend everything's all great. No, it's not. But, be in reality, deal with what you have, and understand that there is something good. If God is good, which he is, and he means everything for good, which he does, then there's something good in the thing that you're dealing with right now that's also being really unpleasant and tipping you over. So let's dig into that. Let's learn about it so we can then have the joy of the Lord as our strength and move forward. So that's worth doing. And the neat thing about it too is that, for most people, Shanti Feldhahn has a book about highly happy marriages. And one of the pieces of data in there is that the people that hung in there through those periods of hopelessness, 5 years later, they're still married and they're happier. So that's a piece of encouragement for people, is don't give up. 5 years from now, things are going to be different no matter what. So.
Amen. I love that. Well, if you want to learn more about these facts, how to develop these skills, we have a free e-booklet on our website, greaterimpact.org. We also offer coaching and other goodies there. And if you want to enjoy more of these discussions, check out our next episode. Thanks for joining.